do the organizations really understand the relationship between business architecture and org design? Is that something that we think about?
So do they really understand? No, and I think it's for a couple of reasons that are easily solved. One is when you business architects are usually typically placed in IT. So there in and of itself, you have this weird ivory tower that's disconnected from the business. So moving us out of that technology realm, like we don't lose our knowledge, we just don't report up through IT. That puts us in a seat where we're understanding more that business, well, where the executives see us more as a business advocate as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, hey, I'm just going to create the pretty pictures.
Mm-hmm.
We start connecting that value, we get that seat, we talk about the strategy, we can give them options on how to organize their company, their organization. So once we move into that realm, it's a lot easier to have those conversations with the executives.
Hey everybody, how are you guys doing out there? We're having our second recording of the day here today. So I've got the marketing team, Stefan, my video guy, and Tim Zach, my chief marketing officer, pretty busy. Today in this session, we are going to explore some topics around business architecture. And just to give everybody a little bit of a background, you guys will hear me often talk about things like business capabilities, business capability modeling. I'm not a deep expert in that by any means. The history of that relative to LeadingAgile is that Dennis Stevens, who is one of our co-founders and chief methodologist, came out of Microsoft and some of their business architecture practice, was really involved in business analyst community, was a participant in the business analyst body of knowledge for PMI, has a lot of background in that. And so when Dennis and I met about 13, 14 years ago, he was talking a lot about the idea of business architecture relative to organizational design. And really at that time, it was a little beyond like what I was capable of understanding. And so I basically said to Dennis, I was like, hey, let's stop talking about that because, I don't quite know what to do with it, right? It's interesting, but it's not super useful to me right now. And so, but over the years, it's been really cool, right? Because like what LeadingAgile does, we have business architects on our staff. The two guests that I've got here with me, Len Greski and Melissa Roberts, are both fall in that category. They both have skills and capabilities way beyond that, but they're both in their own rights really deep experts in the process or the practice of business architecture. We started bringing in business architects because it was like when you're trying to do agile transformation, it's really important to have a clear understanding of what you want to organize around. And one of the things that we see in a lot of really, really early stage transformations is that while we'd love to organize around products, we'd love to organize around value streams, there's lots of things we'd love to organize around customers and markets, things like that. A lot of times a really good starting place is organizing around the business architecture. And it enables us to be able to see where the dependencies are, where the coordination costs are, to be able to really get them very clearly understood through the governance models. And then that creates an opportunity to rethink the business architecture and rethink how we're grouping things organizationally. And so the net, right, the way that I always say it, it's like the reason why we do business architecture is so we can start to create a defensible strategy for team formation. Because at the end of the day, I want encapsulated teams that can have steady throughput, and then we're in the presence of dependencies, we want to be able to coordinate dependencies, all the stuff I normally talk about. So with that as our preamble, I'm going to hand the floor to Melissa, and I'm going to ask Melissa to talk to me a little bit about what she thinks the role of business architecture is in transformation.
Ooh,
Go.
that's a really good question, Mike.
Yeah.
So business architecture plays such a huge key role in and understanding holistically where the business is, so that we can then come in and say, okay, you talked about business capabilities earlier. Well, your business capabilities are fairly stable. So if you're thinking about a manufacturing company, those capabilities, when they first started, it could be 100 years ago to today, are going to be the same. You've got order management, you've got product management. So organizing around those standard capabilities helps you understand where the transformation needs to be, because you can then look at that capability. The capability can have multiple products under it, and those products change with time. And as we know, time is quickly moving and things are happening. So it allows that transformation that the executives can then see where to invest if you have that cohesive, holistic view of your business capabilities.
So let me see if I can restate that for you a little bit, just for my understanding. Like when I was first getting introduced to this, what I think I hear you saying is that the business capability view is a largely static view of the organization. A manufacturing company 100 years ago largely has the same core business capabilities that a manufacturing company does today. But the technologies that we use to implement those business capabilities are inevitably going to change. So the way I've always understood business architecture, it's really almost an abstraction to the organization that basically allows us to focus on what we do or produce, the capabilities that we have, and kind of separate them from their implementation details. Is that fair?
That is absolutely spot on. Yes.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Len, talk to me, man. What is your thought on business architecture and its role in technology transformation?
Well, as you and Melissa just discussed, there's the piece of understanding what the major units of value are in an organization. Its business capabilities, where each capability is a distinctive combination of people, business processes, and assets that generate measurable value. So, in transformation, you want to know who your customers are, what products or services are you providing to those customers, and what are the key value propositions whose value you want to accelerate. Then the second is, once you know where the units of value are, is how do you organize around? What teams do you have? What are the dependencies between those teams? How do we orchestrate those dependencies? And most critically, what can we encapsulate in the independent things so that we can maximize the flow of value by eliminating dependencies?
One of the things I was thinking about this when Melissa was speaking, and so I'm going to get your take on it, Len, and then we'll bounce it back over to Melissa. Like I tell you, the language around this stuff is really hard, right? So we talk about the idea of like products versus capabilities versus value streams. It's like, it doesn't feel like the taxonomy is understood. It feels like we really overload the language a little bit. So Melissa introduced the idea that like maybe products could be nested up underneath a business capability. Like is that the language, or is there something that's more abstract that we could pull out of it? Like, talk to me about your thoughts, and then I'll let Melissa have at it.
Well, there's quite a bit of debate in the industry, and so this is one of those areas where understanding where a client is and how they talk about their company and value, you want to tweak the theory so that it's easy for the client to understand that you're not doing a lot of mental gymnastics to force some theoretical structure on them. Yeah. And so the Occam's razor applies. Keep it as simple as possible.
Melissa, what do you think? What's your take on it?
I agree with Len and with you. It's a very abstract concept when you're talking about capabilities, and then I throw in the word product. We meet the client where we are. There was one situation where the client just couldn't wrap their heads around business capabilities, but they could wrap it around microservices. I'm like, okay, so let's consider services. It's a service capability that they could understand, and they wrap their head around it, and we could progress.
Interesting. That was an epiphany I had probably 12 years ago. I went over, and I don't know if it still goes on, but it was a conference in Sweden called Ordev. And I was listening to a talk by a gentleman from Nokia. And he was talking about in the way he was using products. And this is an example I use a lot. It's like a product to a lot of people is like my cell phone. And it's a product. But if you think about it, a product is made up of cell phone, right? You've got the technology, you've got the hardware, you've got the network, you've got the billing systems, you've got the infrastructure, like you got all these things, right? So it's like products are almost like incredibly recursive in that regard. It's so what I kind of heard you say in your last comment, it's like our goal isn't to be dogmatic about the words mean. It's like we're trying to figure out how to be principally aligned on a concept and then negotiate potentially locally language that makes sense and resonates with a particular client?
Yes, absolutely. That's right.
Cool. Len, I'm going to ask you a question. I was talking with Dennis. Dennis is our chief methodologist around here. I think I mentioned him earlier, one of our co-founders. We were bouncing around an idea in like the space of cloud migration. And it seems like the business has this language of business capabilities. And we talk about business capability modeling. And it's kind of a new concept to me because I'm not a hardcore technologist anymore. But we have this concept on the technology side of like domains and domain design. And then it seems like in the product world, obviously we have the idea of products. And then, in the project world, we have the idea of projects sometimes. We have org design. It almost seems like every area of a company has a different language or different taxonomies around how to break big things into small things. You've been a technology executive, in addition to being a senior consultant around here, principal consultant, excuse me. You've had a lot of experience in the C-suite. Like, talk to me about the challenges of every area of the organization having its own language to describe this.
Well, the big challenge is how do you get everybody to a shared view reality?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, particularly for a publicly traded company, the shared view reality is represented in its profit and loss statement and its balance sheet. Because every quarter, publicly traded companies have to explain, where they are in terms of profit and loss and how that relates to the value of the company as represented in its balance sheet. And so one way to cut through all the noise is to take an economic perspective and to really look at the business through the lens of things that generate revenue and things that generate cost. And how do you organize units of work to either grow revenue or grow profitability? And when we can align around the finances, then you can just map back to whatever jargon a particular functional area is using and use the finances to standardize all that.
So let me ask you a question. Like your brain fired a certain direction. So like in my head, and this is like my mental model, right? My head is like, it's like business capabilities are one language, domains are another language, organizational objects are a different language, products are a different language. And in an ideal world, in Mike's ideal world behind organizational business transformation is they get alignment across those, not just shared understanding what they are, but I would love to see a world where like the business capability, the domain, the organization, the product is all the same thing. And that's the language. Now, your brain fired into the financial justification, right? KPIs, OKRs, how we're measuring the business, profit and loss. Talk to me about the relationship between that level of alignment and the ability to to do that kind of analysis at the top level of an organization.
Well, and that's why business capabilities are so important as a tool to understand the flow of value, because a capability generates benefits and it generates costs. And you build capability and then you operate it over time to deliver your products and services. And therefore, you can manage your capabilities like assets to grow the benefits they generate relative to the costs they generate over time. And then that allows executives to prioritize work to maximize the value of their capabilities.
Okay, Melissa, as we were preparing for this, one of the things that we were kind of hunting around was the idea of, Dennis will call it like strategy delegation or strategy articulation, or taking strategy and bringing it down to execution, like something in that space. I think there's a book you had me read by Wendy Kuhn. She talks about strategy to reality, like getting it down all the way to the work surface. So talk to me a little bit about how we do strategy articulation, strategy delegation through a business capability model. I know it's a big question, but let's see if we can unpack that a little bit.
Here's how I see it, right? We worked with a health insurance company, and that company had already been aligned by business capabilities. So they were a leg up with that. What they were finding in their market was that they were losing ground in a couple of counties in the state to another rival insurance company. So oh my God, what do we do? What they ended up doing is coming up with a couple of product ideas. And by product ideas in this sense, I mean new insurance offerings that they have never done before, that the rival company, one of the offerings the rival company had never done either. So in order to invest in that, they knew that they had to invest more in one of the capabilities. And by investing more, I meant deprioritizing some stuff that capability was working on, hiring a couple of new developers for some of the development teams because they were going to be using new technology. They also had to work with the business area for them to understand that we were going to move in a more agile way, in the sense that we needed to fail fast with these products. So what the company was used to doing in the past before they were organized around capabilities was spending years and years and years developing a product and then throwing it out into the entire state without understanding if that product would work. Instead, they were more agile, and they said, well, we're going to pick 2 key counties. We're going to show this product in these counties and see if we need to adapt. That saved time. They were able to throw out 2 ideas that just were not going to fly in that state and hone in on the one that would. And now that product is being offered to several other counties.
Awesome. Super cool. Lynn, I'm going to bounce this. I'm going to build on what Melissa just said. When I was first learning about business capabilities 13, 14 years ago, and, again, prior to LeadingAgile, prior to Dennis and I working together, we had a client who I was actually collaborating with, and he was a friend of mine, actually used to work for him, and we were kind of talking about this language, and the way he explained it to me, I thought was very powerful. It was when we have an idea, like Melissa was talking about, we have a hypothesis on how we want to go to market with something. We can look at the organization and we can see what capabilities within the organization are going to be required to implement that idea. And one of the cool things about business capabilities is, and you guys will have to help me if I get it wrong, but they have characteristics. So they have performance characteristics, risk characteristics, capacity, performance, I don't know, right? Something like that. You guys probably know the exact language and the way the heat map is built. But what was kind of cool is that if I have an idea, I can see where the heat map lights up. Then I can start to see, am I trying to implement that idea through a undercapacitized capability, or a capability that has appropriate capacity, a capability that's at risk, a capability that's performing, a capability that's underperforming, and it kind of gives you a guide on, if you're going to get that thing into market, where do I need to invest dollars to increase throughput over the system? And that thinking was really a big part of how we kind of invented our governance models, our throughput analysis of organizations and such. Okay, so big question. So Melissa was explaining to us about how to delegate intent. I would love if you could build on my maybe imperfect understanding and talk to us about how governance frameworks overlay a capability model to drive appropriate strategy delegation and maybe even drive like investment decisioning, where we put dollars. Big question, I know. Can you do it?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
As we look at a portfolio of capabilities, and every organization develops a strategy of like where is it going to play in the market and how is it going to win. And in order to actually execute that strategy, you need business capabilities. And so that ties to given your strategy of where you're going to play and how you're going to win, looking at which capabilities are required to play in the places that you're going to play, and then to how to operate how you're going to win. That will then lead to decisions about investments in people, business processes, or assets that are required to deliver the value propositions to execute your strategy. And you can analyze it at the entire company level across all of the organization's capabilities. And there have been some organizations that we've worked with where when you do it at that level of abstraction, you can then evaluate where the market opportunities are in terms of either growth in new customers or in share of wallet with existing customers, then assess the required capabilities and what's required investment dollars to deliver that value. And then you can calculate financial numbers like a net present value and return on invested capital to see which investments will exceed your organization's return on invested capital hurdle rate. And those are the things that you invest in.
Excellent. So basically, it's like a language. So again, that's a little bit above my pay grade in terms of my ability to wrap my head around. But what you're basically saying is that as I'm delegating into the organization, I can use the business capability model to really understand what to invest in and where to invest to get the maximum return on investment. Is that where we're headed?
That's right. And to do that objectively.
Yeah, that's a big distinction objectively, right? So it's not about politics and favoritism. It's about where does the business deploy resources to maximize value, irrespective of anything else going on.
Right. And as an example, sometimes that type of analysis brings up counterintuitive or surprising results. And in one situation, an organization where we work with felt the executives believed they needed to do a software platform replacement. And as the team organized and analyzed the business capabilities, what the team discovered was the biggest area of opportunity was eliminating delays in the organization's supply chain. And so rather than doing a platform replacement, they invested in a lean program to improve, to reduce back orders in the supply chain, and it generated significant value for the company and avoided a big capital expense that was unnecessary.
So you gave me kind of a good setup for the next place I want to go. So we were talking about governance, we're talking about supply chain. Where my brain is drifting off to was the idea of value streams. So Melissa, what I was hoping you could do for me, tell me a little bit about how the business architecture world thinks about value streams, and maybe what is the relationship between a value stream and a business capability?
Sure. So value stream is one of those other loaded words.
Oh yeah,
Depends on,
I know.
right?
I don't ask you easy questions, Melissa. I got it. So,
So from a business architecture's perspective, the value stream is you have a customer, and what is that value prop, that proposition that the customer wants. So it can be something like order to purchase, right? So it's that flow of activities that happens. How that relates to your business capabilities is the value stream supports those business capabilities. So you can have a value stream that crosses over multiple capabilities, but you don't have a capability that crosses over to another capability.
so what you're that's not what I thought you were going to say. What was the last thing you just said for me? No, it's good. No, it's cool.
So you can have a value stream that crosses over multiple capabilities, but you typically do not have a capability that crosses another capability.
Oh, okay. A capability that crosses. At first I thought you were talking about something like nested, and I know nested capabilities is a thing.
Yes,
Well,
that's
where
the
I
thing.
was going to go is that what I'm almost hearing is that the relationship between a value stream and a capability, it's like a value stream is like the flow of work across capabilities. Is that to solve a customer problem?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's like the
cool.
activity, the action.
Oh, what I want to go to is it the orchestration? Is a value stream almost like the orchestration of dependencies, or the orchestration of the flow across capabilities? Am I hunting in a good place?
I think you could look at it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're syncing on language here. This is in real time. This is cool. Len, what do you think, man? My hypothesis is that a value stream is really in effect, the orchestration, like the token that moves across capabilities and realizes value across capabilities. Is that legit? Is that industry standard, or is that just how Mike thinks about it?
I agree that that's a way to look at it. Because it's essentially the steps taken to deliver value to a customer or the organization, and since a value stream is realized through one or more capabilities, then those steps orchestrate the work across the capabilities if multiple capabilities are involved.
Yeah, the reason why I'm kind of pulling into this is because, as we've talked about, like one of the challenges, as we were prepping for this call, it's like sometimes we think that like business architecture or business architects, they show up and they want to do business architecture for the sake of business architecture. Like somehow that document that we produce is somehow like an end in of it to itself. But if like we're not pulling through the business architecture to do the alignment work, to understand how it maps to value streams, so we understand how work flows through the organization, ties up to organizational performance, like what's the point? So Len, and this might be my assertion, right? Or maybe my assumption, it seems like business architects in some ways have become disconnected from the influence that they're trying to have in organizations. So how do we connect business architects and business architecture more closely to the operations and the actual running of the business? Any thoughts?
Well, and that's why a lot of the work that we like to do is based on the economics, because senior executives, the problems that they're trying to solve are either how do you grow, how do you increase profit, or how do you manage scale and the sustainability of teams and the organization. And in order to be relevant, the more frequently that you can play in that space about growth, profitability, scale, and sustainability, then you're going to have an influence.
Okay, so that's okay. So at first I thought you were going to dodge my question, but I think you got to it at the end. It's like, so to get a seat at the table, we got to connect what we do to business value.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Melissa, what's your take? I know you feel strongly about this. I know you feel strongly that business architects need to have that seat at the table. Like, do the organizations really understand the relationship between business architecture and org design? Is that something that we think about?
So do they really understand? No, and I think it's for a couple of reasons that are easily solved. One is when you business architects are usually typically placed in IT. So there in and of itself, you have this weird ivory tower that's disconnected from the business. So moving us out of that technology realm, like we don't lose our knowledge, we just don't report up through IT. That puts us in a seat where we're understanding more that business, well, where the executives see us more as a business advocate as opposed to, hey, I'm just going to create the pretty pictures. We start connecting that value. We get that seat. We talk about the strategy. We can give them options on how to organize their company, their organization. So once we move into that realm, it's a lot easier to have those conversations with the executives.
Okay, so when with the book that you had me read, I went straight to the place of business architecture and SAFe, and it was an interesting exploration. And I'm gonna make an assertion here that I think is true, and then you guys can tell me if you think it's true or not. Is I think the business architecture community right now sees like business architecture and delivery as fundamentally separate. Like the business architecture is like the investment lens, is tied up, all these things, and then the delivery org realizes that investment strategy through the lens of the business architecture and goes up. It might just be me, right? Because this isn't the world I grew up in. But I think if we could explicitly link literally the org design, the technology strategy, the domain design, the product design to the business architecture and roll it up into a cohesive model, I think that's the bridge that the business architecture community is looking for. So I'm going to ask Len if he has any comments on that, and then I'll go to Melissa and see what she thinks. What do you got, Len? What do you think?
Well, I'll speak for the two of us for the moment, and then Melissa can correct me.
Okay.
That's why we recently wrote the article Organizing Around Business Capabilities. And because when you organize around capabilities, it links the organization design to the building and operating of capabilities, where at the end of it, when you transform a capability to be something in an independent, discrete unit of value, you get a composable organization.
My favorite word. That's my word of the month, man. My word of the year, the composable enterprise.
Which allows you to bring products and services to market, as much as 80% faster than you would without them.
Yeah. That's cool. For anybody who's not really familiar with that, like the way that I think about it, like the holy grail in all this stuff is if I can get the business architecture, the domains, the products, and get all that stuff into alignment, break the dependencies between them, have like minimal orchestration across these objects. That's what a composable enterprise is. It's like services oriented architecture for a business. It's like a services oriented business, right? And the language of that, I think, is business capabilities. And I'll tell you, when we started building our internal practice at LeadingAgile, Dennis spearheaded that and was really responsible for bringing this in. That was the thing I kept saying. It's like, we don't do business architecture for business architecture's sake. We do business architecture because we're looking for a repeatable, defensible way of articulating a team-based org design. A very clear way of understanding where dependencies are so that we can either break them or orchestrate them. Melissa, any thoughts on that in general? Anything you want to add to what Len had to say?
Oh, Lynn said it so well. I totally agree that you have to have that whole picture. So when I say business architecture looks at it holistically, that's what I mean. It's from delivery on up to the business operations. If you can't tie those pieces together, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, you're not going to point. You're just creating heat maps.
Yeah.
Around the organization.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about this notion of the composable enterprise. One of the things over the last couple of years that LeadingAgile has been building capability around is the idea of doing product extraction work, services extraction, so that as we move from like a Basecamp 2 to Basecamp 3, Basecamp 4 enterprise, we can actually separate the concerns between the different business objects in the organization. And I have kind of a hypothesis that part of the reason that cloud migration strategies are failing is because we are migrating independent from an understanding of how the business works. Len, do you have a point of view for me on the relationship with or how business architecture could inform things like technology modernization, tech uplift, cloud migration? Some of the really big problems that CIOs, CTOs, and businesses in general are facing right now. How do business architects have a seat at that table?
Well, it starts, and not to keep beating the economics drum.
Yeah, sure.
Knowing what generates value, because the best time to kill a bad investment is before you start spending money on it.
Right.
And so, where business architecture, you can look at it from the perspective of a capability of what benefits does it generate. And that's going to tell you, when you subtract out a hurdle rate, what you can spend, what your maximum cost can be. And if you know the cost structure to build and operate, then you can collaborate on how much benefit must be generated in order to make it financially viable.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, and I apologize if I cut too early, but I want to see if we can drive this home and really pull this thread. If we have a business focused view of the architecture and we're thinking about the economics of our investments and which things are going to, I think the way you say it is overcome the hurdle rate and get an ROI for us. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that we could use business architecture in that economically driven lens to decide which things need to be moved to the cloud, which things need to either be lifted and shifted or made cloud native? Are you hypothesizing that business architecture and the financial drivers would be used as an economic prioritization model for what things get modernized, uplifted, or moved? Is that the thought? Yes. Okay, cool. I got it right then. Okay, cool. Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you played in that space at all?
I've played a little in that space. I played in that space when we worked with a media company.
Okay.
Right. So they wanted to do cloud migration. Okay. They had monolithic systems. They needed to understand. Classic, right? Yeah. But they needed to understand, as Len was saying, the economics of those business capabilities. And in one instance, what it showed is they needed to totally divest in a capability. They didn't need to do anything with it. They needed to have some other organization take care of it because it was not in their strategy. They also found from the economics that they needed to lift and shift one of the backbones of what they're doing, which is an asset registration system. So by doing that, we had to sell it to the business as well, right? Mm-hmm. So the business just doesn't get when you have to do the lift and the shift, when you're having to do the cloud migration. What does it give that business? Right. Well, in this sense, what the business architects were doing was going into this media company and saying, well, let's talk about your processes. Mm-hmm. Let's see how much time we can save in these processes. That time equals money saved. So by doing that, they were like, "Oh, cool! Yeah, I agree with this. Let's do it." So
one of the things that we're observing, reading about, seeing firsthand, right, with our clients is that the reason why some of these technology transformations are failing is because on the other side of the technology transfer, there's an organization that has to run it. And one of the problems that we're seeing is that if you don't change the organization, you don't change how the business operates on the other side of the tech uplift, that it just ends up repeating the same problems and creating the same legacy monoliths in the cloud. Len, do you have any thoughts on that, a point of view, and like what we could do about it, how business architecture could help?
Yes. I mean, having had to manage cloud migrations, some of the things that you have to wrestle with are, number one, what's the cost to operate it? And how does that relate to your current on-premise solution? And particularly the movement of expenses from capitalized expenses to operating expenses, where companies that have a big backlog of capital expenses waiting to be depreciated and amortized, that move to cloud can be painful because you still have expenses that you're burning off through its depreciation, the depreciation schedules, while you're ramping up all these operating expenses that immediately hit your income statement. Next is the issue of security and interaction with a centralized data center, where often organizations that are moving to the cloud have fairly robust security infrastructures, and often people will design a cloud migration without taking into account moving the security to the cloud. And then if the security is centralized in a legacy data center, you wind up paying a lot of what are called egress fees to move data back and forth as you're doing the security authentications. And so understanding the business processes and how to design and realize the value streams in ways that don't cause a lot of chattiness between the cloud and a centralized data center are critical to making the cloud economics work.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Melissa, any thoughts on that? Anything you want to add? And no is fine too, by the way. Okay, cool. I'm just giving you a shot, right? I get it. Okay. Well, so with what that made me think about, Len, and I know, Melissa, you'll have a point of view on this. I might be pulling this in a different direction, but just help me understand. You talked a little bit about, when we were getting ready for this, the idea of what stuck in my head is like build capabilities versus run capabilities. So let's end on that here. And so let's explore that, and let's see how it ties in to the rest of our conversation. So let's just lead off with, I think you use different words, but let's explore this idea of a build capability versus a run capability.
So I mean, every capability, you have to build it and then you have to operate it.
Build and operate. That's what I was thinking about. Okay.
And for people who are involved in product development, there's often a huge focus on build and then not much focus on operate. And we know, from the perspective of the costs of a software application, that typically 75 to 90% of the total lifecycle cost of a software application occurs after you initially deploy it to customers or end users. And so understanding what happens at operate is really critical. And there's a big opportunity in the industry to take more of a total life cycle perspective. And again, if you're managing and organizing around business capabilities, a big part of the value is the modeling of the benefits and costs in operations.
Melissa, how is the industry thinking about the distinction between build capabilities and operate capabilities now? Is there any kind of standardization of that thinking or practice?
Actually, there's not. There's not that I have seen. To me, it's just logical, right? If you're going to build something, you have to know how you're operating it.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen that distinction called out.
One of the things we've been exploring And this is an interesting thing because like one of the things the Agile community is trying to do is, it's really common. You have like the people that build the software, you have the people that run the software, you have the people that support the software. And a lot of times it's like the help desk, the operations team, the build team, they're all working on different things. And kind of one of the holy grails in the Agile world is build, run, operate. Mm-hmm. So follow my logic thread here. So if we have business capabilities, we have build and operate capabilities, what we really would like to have is one capability that maybe shifts its focus from build to run to operate to support, maybe shifts its resource dynamic, its people dynamic over time based upon the amount of investment and change that's being put into that tool. Does the business architecture community support the idea of like a common business capability where the people change over time based upon the needs of the organization as it moves from build to operate or stays in a build operate mode? Any thoughts on that, Melissa?
I think it should, and I think it does. If you're looking at the business capability as people, assets, and technology, then yeah, the people are going to change their role depending on where you are in that build or run and operate.
I think maybe I indexed too much on that. Let me
Sure.
bounce over to Len for just a second. Len, so like I guess what I'm trying to tease out is, do I have two capabilities, a build capability and an operate capability? Do I have one capability that that does both, possibly ebbing and flowing between the two views over time?
Well, I think that a capability, it should include the teaming structure to build it, the teaming structure to manage its technical operations, and the teaming structure to manage its business operations, because then it's fully encapsulated and you can treat it like an asset.
There you go. That connects the dots back up. Very cool.
Right. And so depending on where the capability is in its life cycle, so when it's new, you're investing heavily in build and maybe a little bit in operate once you deliver it to customers. Mm-hmm. And an agile approach, you want to get to a, minimum viable capability. If you're taking something in the market as a product, you're using that minimum viable to learn. And so there's more investment in build, a little bit in operate, because in order to get feedback, you got to operate. Yeah. Then as it gains market acceptance and you build out additional capability, the resource profile is going to shift from, mostly build to maybe half and half build and operate. And then when it's in production and not changing so much, then it may be mostly operate, not so much build. And then as it gets towards retire, then you may be, beginning to draw down the operating expense and investing that in another capability.
Man, this conversation is just getting me more and more convinced. I think this is going to be my parting thought, and then I'll give you guys opportunity for any closing statements you want to make. I'm getting more and more convinced that business capability, domain modeling, product identification, product extraction, tech modernization, tech uplift, cloud migration, right? It's all aspects of the same thing. And I think there's huge opportunity in our industry for at least aligning conceptually, if not the language of business architecture, with some of these other domains, using these economic prioritization models to not only drive investment decisions in what products we build, what things we move, when we move them, how fast we move them, but also informing how the business needs to change on the backside of it to be able to support those technologies in the new world. Really fascinating. And it's like we keep dealing with these things, like the agile world's in a silo, the business architecture world's in a silo, the technology world's in a silo. And I think we're all hunting the same things, big things into small things, maximizing investments, exploiting capacities to yield your ROI. I don't know, just thinking out loud. So with that, Melissa, any parting thoughts before we go?
This was fun. No.
Okay.
No, I think you're onto something, really, Mike, that we've worked so long in these different silos, but we're all trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah.
That what is that one thread that can pull us all together? And perhaps it is architecture, business architecture.
Yeah, I think so. Len, what do you got? Parting comments?
Well, anything that we can do to help senior executives delegate the right work into their organizations using economics and time boxing to prove the value. We help organizations execute on their strategy. And, when I started writing on this topic 15 years ago, that's really what I was wrestling with, is like, how do you get all these people to speak the same language so that we know where opportunities are and organize the right teams and give them the right guardrails with just enough management oversight to manage risk and results. And that's why I think that combining organizing around capabilities with agile transformation is so critical, because the leading agile system of delivery, its structure, governance, and metrics give you the delivery capability that you need in order to manage risk and measure the results you're getting from the work you've delegated into the system.
Yeah, just as we wrap this up, like, I'll tell you, that's the one thing. It's been my point of frustration with the Agile community for a while. I think there's a lot of us out there that know what to do, but so much of the Agile community is stuck in the Scrum world and the team level stuff. And, we went down this path in market a few years ago with Elevate Agile. We were doing some little conferences, kind of got derailed from that over the last couple of years. But gosh, I really still think there's a place for agility. I think there's a place for agile in this world. I think there is a place for these concepts. And I think that connecting all these dots across the industry is going to be the thing that ultimately gets us there. I think it's the thing that's going to keep agile alive. I think it's going to be the thing that makes business architecture relevant. I think it's going to be the thing that really unlocks the power of cloud and tech uplift and modernization, product-driven organization. We're all hunting the same things. So everybody, really appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you so much for spending an hour or so with us, and we look forward to doing some more of these and unpacking these topics. If there's anything that me and Melissa and Len talked about that you'd like to hear us pull through a little bit more, maybe do a follow-up conversation, please put something in the comments, reach out to us on our Contact Us page, hit us up on social media, and we would love to continue the conversation with you. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.